Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. Folks, I hope you're going to be preparing yourselves for Easter Sunday. Easter's coming up here very shortly, and I think it's a very timely one. In fact, what I may do is that I may introduce the pastor here to give us a little prayer, if you don't mind, just to make sure if we can encourage folks to actually participate in the Easter Sunday activities, and then we'll get into the show. Is that okay with everybody?
That's absolutely fine with me.
Sure.
Join me in prayer. Father, what a wonderful, wonderful time it is in our lives to be able to thank you for the many things that you do. As we come into this week of a Holy Week leading up to Easter Sunday, and the many activities that will be in the houses of faith as we look back at your birth and look back at your death. And I was reminded just this past week that what you asked us to remember was your death, because in doing that, you gave us all that we needed for life. You gave us a right to become the children of God and a right again to be able to serve you. Thank you for giving your life. Pray, God, that not only your life that you promised that would give us abundant life, that we might receive it and use it fully to help those, including those who are our neighbors. It is in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bethel from Maranatha Church. I'll say Pastor Bethel on that last piece. But now, folks, to tell you what, we're just going to get right into this situation. The reason why we're having this is a very appropriate time to do this. I happened to pick up the Oregonian. Tommy, can you pick this up? This is the early edition of the Sunday Oregonian, and it's on the front page article by Maxine Bernstein. She's been covering this whole issue about Campbell and whatever, but it says arbitrator supports fired officer. Okay, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to read a couple of lines here, points that were made. It was reasonable to believe that he could be armed, and there was sufficient evidence for a finding that Mr. Campbell made motions that appeared to look like he was reaching for a gun. That was from the state arbitrator Jane R. Wilkinson's 73-page ruling, and I'll explain to you about what that's all about. I'm sure you remember the gentleman by the name of Campbell, this young man that was shot in the back by a Portland police officer. But again, the articles, this is from the Sunday Oregonian, April 1. And then there was a response, if you will, from the Albina Ministerial Alliance. In fact, Dr. Bethel was part and parcel of that statement. It says the reinstatement of Frazier is another in a long line of arbitration overturning firings of officers who use deadly force or otherwise take actions often targeted at communities of color. I thought it was very important to us to spend an hour on this issue because, as you know, from a national perspective, we've got the issue in Florida. Reverend Al Sharpton and the whole issue of police has always been an issue when it talks to African Americans and other people of color, in all due respect, around the country for that matter. But this here is within our particular community. In all due respect, folks, the first thing I saw when I picked up this issue, because I always picked up two issues of the Oregonian, the early edition and the late edition. It was April 1, and I thought it was April Fool's Day. I hate to be so but I said this is not real. So I picked up the second issue of it just to make sure, and it was never mentioned whether in the front page or even in the metro section of the Sunday Oregonian.
Interesting.
Yes, and I thought that was so. I thought it was very, very important. And what I have today, who I have today with me, are two individuals who have spent a great deal of time from a historical standpoint. And I'm talking about Joanne Hardesty. You're pretty well familiar with Joanne Bowman, but Bowman is gone. And this will be the last time I would mention that name. I won't even say that name.
That's
It's
right.
Joanne Hardesty, okay?
Right.
Okay, so now you've got Joanne, and she has Hardesty Consultant Services, equity planning, lobbying, and organizing, and she's very well qualified, I'll put it that way, okay? And Joanne's going to be basically talking to the history of the whole issue in regards surrounding this particular issue. And then we've got Dr. Bethel, who is president of the Albina Ministerial Alliance. And again, that was a statement that he had made. And then so our purpose here is to educate you, because too often you hear the activism, if you will, of the Albina Ministerial Alliance or the activism of Joanne Hardesty, and that's not the case. The fact of the matter is, it's talking to all of us. It's an issue that many, from a historical standpoint, people don't want to talk about. Like it's a black issue or African American issue or brown issue. No, it's a community issue. It's a statewide issue. It's a country issue. We've got a problem here, and we've got to talk to solutions. And the only way we can do that is to talk about it, bring it to the table, and not be afraid to voice your opinion. We do need law enforcement. That's a fact.
Yes.
We do need law enforcement, but it has to be inclusive. And it's not a them against us. In fact, I might mention that in regards to Joanne, because both of us have had some similar backgrounds in regards to the armed forces. She Navy, I'm Marine Corps, and we know about the they against us type routine in a situation of war. And we're not talking about wars outside of this country. We're talking about inside, and there's nowhere in the world we can have that kind of divisiveness along that line division. So with that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give these two people an opportunity to talk from a historical standpoint, and Joanne's got some good background on that particular issue, and Dr. Bethel then will bring in the AMA in terms of how he got in this particular case, so we'll understand exactly what happened and why they got involved and where they are today. And if you want to reference that, we're going to be referencing, if you will, the Maxine Bernstein article in the Oregonian, the early edition. You can get it on the website, but the bottom line is that that's the support. We're going to reference that. Okay, so with that, Joanne, would you mind giving us some background, some reference, if you will?
No, not at all. What I will say is that I moved to Portland January 1st, 1990, and moved from the Bay Area and thought, I'm moving to this really progressive place. Shortly thereafter, though, what I realized is that we had some problems in our community, like most communities around the country, when it came to the interactions of the police bureau and how they engage young people in our community, especially black and brown youth. I have been working on police accountability for almost the entire time I've lived here in Oregon, and actually first as a volunteer. But then Kendra James happened. And I think when Kendra James was killed by Portland Police, and people may remember that this was a young woman known to Portland police officers who was stopped as a passenger in a vehicle in North Portland. The officer involved said that she jumped out of the back seat, tried to drive away, and he shot and killed her. That's
African American.
African American. She was an African American woman, and I think that was one of the first times that, as a community, whether you were black, white, brown, or otherwise, the community came out in force and said, "Now wait a minute, how do you have a 250-plus-pound officer and a 105-pound woman, and he had no other choice but to pull his gun and shoot and kill her?" The fact that they were stopped for a traffic stop, the fact that she had an outstanding warrant for a no-show in court, so they knew where she lived, they knew they knew that she was part of the community. There was really no reason to escalate the activity to the point where they shot and killed her. And so that was the first time that I was actually asked by the Albina Ministerial Alliance to actually convene a community group to come together, actually review the police reports, and then come up with a report and make recommendations to the police chief and the city council. And we did that. Over a period of 6 months, we met with hundreds of community members. We reviewed all the documentation, all the grand jury testimony, all the witnesses that were at the scene, and concluded that the police officer had many other options other than just pulling his gun and shooting and killing that young woman.
Who was the mayor at that time?
The mayor at that time was, who was the mayor at that time?
Katz.
Was it Katz? It was Vera Katz. It was Vera
He
Katz
was the
at
president
that
of
time.
the union. I think that was.
It was not Robert King at that
Was it
time.
King?
It was before King.
Okay.
I believe it was before King. But that goes to show
Okay,
how
but I'm just
long
saying.
we
Yes,
have been
yes,
dealing,
right,
because police chiefs have come and gone, mayors have come and gone, police union presidents have come and gone, but we still have a community who believes that they are under attack by law enforcement. And it's been consistent over the years. I mean, Perez was killed because his car was too new for the neighborhood that he drove in. I can't help but making a connection between Trayvon Martin in Florida with Keaton Otis right, who also had a hoodie on, and he was stopped. The whole reason he was stopped was because he was wearing a hoodie on a day that the officer thought it was too hot for him to be wearing a hoodie, and so they pulled him over. And these were supposedly gang enforcement officers. But if you read the transcript, and I think that's the thing that the public rarely does, when police commit these kind of actions, there's a grand jury process. The grand jury hears basically only from the police. And what I've learned over the years is that the grand jury goes out of, the district attorney go out of their way to make the police officers human to the grand jury. Yeah, where did you go to school? Where did you grow up? How did you get into law enforcement? Why are you in law enforcement? What's your dreams for the future? But the grand jury doesn't hear about the person that lost their life. They don't hear about what their dreams were, what their vision was, why they ended up in a situation where they were confronted by the cops, right? And so the grand jury hears one side of the scenario. Of course, the most concerned witness is dead. So they actually can't be there to say this is what happened that day. And so for me, over the years, I've reviewed lots of grand jury testimony, talked to lots of witnesses, talked to people who know that our system is set up so that police officers know that they have a magic get out of jail free card. All they have to say is that they were in fear for their life or in fear of someone else's life. And it's closed. It's it. It's over. But meanwhile, the community is left to deal with the fact that there's another unnecessary death. There's a lack of investigation, because guess who's investigating whether the police acted appropriately? It's the police. And so we don't have an independent system of evaluating whether or not police act appropriately. And so in this particular case, when the sharpshooter is almost a football field away, takes his earplug out, so he's not involved in the conversation. He doesn't know what's happening.
Takes his earplug out.
He takes his earplug out. His communication. He took it out, right? Because in his mind, he didn't have to listen to what was going on. He knew better than the people that were talking directly to Aaron Campbell. He knew better than the officers that were surrounding Aaron Campbell. And when Aaron Campbell came out of the house, he had been in communication with the police negotiator. So he comes out of the house, he's following instructions. As soon as he gets out of the house, they shoot him with beanbags. Then they release a dog on him. And then this guy on the football field, a football field away on a rooftop, decides that he's going to shoot and kill him because he's moving like he has a weapon. Well, what would you do if you had been beanbagged, if you had a dog coming after you? You'd be moving and holding your body parts, so of course you would look like you're moving. Had he kept his earpiece in, he would have known that this man was following the directions that he was being given. And so the fact that the arbitrator could say that he could reasonably, as soon as he took the earplug out, he took himself out of the command structure. He decided that as an individual, he was going to make decisions that had absolutely nothing to do with what was happening with Aaron Campbell at that time. And so for me, it's appalling to think that an arbitrator, I'm not surprised, but I am appalled that an arbitrator could say that someone who took themselves out of the command structure, someone who decided that he didn't need to know what the other officers around Aaron Campbell were doing, but that he would know better because he's a football field away, and he could decide, oh, he must have a gun, so let me just shoot and kill him.
Well, tell me then, Joanne, you mentioned several incidents of shootings.
Right. Killings, actually.
Killings, if you will. And then would you talk a little bit about the process? You know what I mean? You mentioned grand jury,
right,
with the bond. What is the process that got them to the point where we got to this arbitrator aspect of it?
Well, there's one thing that really bugs me when it comes to an officer-involved shooting. If I shot you, the police would take me in right away and want to get a statement from me. If I'm a police officer, however, I get 48 hours to get myself together before I'm required to provide a formal statement. So you have 48 hours to decide what your story. Are you on
leave or are you still working in the department?
Well, you're actually on leave, but you're on paid leave, right? So you get to go home, and for 48 hours, you get to do whatever you do to regroup. And then ultimately somebody will come and talk to you. Now, that just doesn't pass the smell test, right? Quite frankly. If I shot you, the police would want me to make a statement. Now, I have the right to say, I want a lawyer and I'm not going to talk to you. But if I don't say that, the police are going to talk to me as long as they can to figure out what happened, right? So why are police officers given this special 48-hour time period before they actually have to make a statement? You would think the statement...
Are they allowed to talk to someone during that 48 hours?
Well, they can. They're not supposed to talk to anybody who was involved in the shooting itself. But how do we figure out whether that happens or not, right? So as the public, we're supposed to believe that for 48 hours, they don't talk to each other. Then they make their formal statement. So then the formal statement is made. Then the case is presented to the grand jury, right? And I should say that the district attorney has a lot of leeway in who gets invited to the grand jury, because what we know in the Aaron Campbell case was eyewitnesses who had actually recorded Aaron Campbell. I'm sorry, not Aaron Campbell. I'm talking of another case. Keep notice is actually what I'm talking about. What we know is with the grand jury is that the district attorney decides who even comes in front of the grand jury. So they look at all the witnesses and they decide who's going to help make the case that they want to make to the grand jury. And so those individuals are then invited to the grand jury. They provide testimony, and then the grand jury will make a determination, right? It has never happened that a community member has been shot and killed by a Portland police officer that the grand jury has said that they believe that it was an inappropriate shooting. And so the community already knows that once the grand jury process happens, the officer's he's walking because we know that, because historically never ever ever has any officer been indicted, because they all know that state law says that if you're in fear of your life or the fear of someone else's life, then you have the ability to use deadly force. And that's the statute that Portland police officers hide behind. But I tell you, if in fact that is true, why isn't there more police-involved shootings in other jurisdictions throughout Oregon? If we all operate under the same law, why is it that Portland police officers have the highest number of deaths at the hands of police officers than any other agency in the state? Because you would think if all the agencies have the same excuse, then there'd be a lot more deaths by police officers. But yet we have police officers in Washington County that can unarm someone who has a bomb, who was a military weapons expert, because they know that this is a man suffering from the repercussions of war, and they disarm him and take him to a mental health hospital. When I read that, I said, if he was in Portland, he'd be dead. There's no question he'd be dead. And so we have police officers who know how to de-escalate situations. We have police officers who know how to disarm people without ever using their bullets. We have police officers who are very good at communicating and engaging people. But for some reason, the culture in Portland Police Bureau is a shoot first, ask questions later. Because the person that you shoot, they won't be able to testify at the grand jury. And so we've allowed that to become the norm in Portland. And I think that's unacceptable.
Now, in the case you just said, you mentioned the grand jury.
Right.
Okay, that was part of the process.
That's right.
And in all these shootings, but then I keep hearing this arbitration. Now here's this arbitration situation.
So
there.
So what happened?
Arbitration
so
situation.
In that particular
did
case,
they go through the same grand jury?
Well,
piece?
the grand jury goes through and deals with the criminal aspect, right? Okay. Now, then the police do an internal investigation, right? That determines whether or not the officers followed policy and procedure. Right? And so in this particular case, both the internal investigation ruled that they thought he acted outside of the process.
And it was the police chief.
It was it was the internal investigation division first, right? And they recommended that because he took his earpiece out, he took himself out of the chain of command, he acted inappropriately. Therefore, the repercussions and the punishment for that were up to the police chief and the mayor, the police commissioner.
Right.
The police commissioner and the mayor decided that Feshauer should be fired. And he should be fired because he took himself out of the command process. And that's what they did. Now, we've had police officers fired before, right? And so the community didn't rest easy. We didn't say, okay, good, he's fired. Now we can get on to actually making our department better, because we knew that anytime a police officer is fired, they have the ability to request arbitration. And so the arbitration started about, 3-4 months ago?
Yes.
And we've been on pins and needles waiting for the outcome of this arbitration. Now, for the first time, I think in the city of Portland's history, the city actually hired outside attorneys to actually fight to support their position of Fresh Howard being fired. Right? And so we've spent almost a $500,000 so far defending this decision to fire him. Now, the fact that the arbitrator recommends he gets his job back is really frightening, because I would think, I know as a community member, having him back in the police bureau will not make the community feel safe at all. In fact, I think it's highly likely that people won't call the police for anything. Knowing that you've got someone who is so out of control back in the police force, and knowing that the police chief and the mayor will have no ability to actually control his behavior, I think sends a very frightening message to the public. And so what I think happens is the public says, well, he's not the only one, right? Because we still have police officers that routinely use excessive force, right? Doesn't normally end up with someone's death, but unfortunately, because the public has such lack of trust in the police ability to actually review and hold police officers accountable, very few people file complaints. And so you and I were actually on the mayor's committee that was changing the process whereby how police complaints would be processed, right? And so since the public knows, I mean, we get this. We get that if you have police officers investigating police officers, they're never, ever going to find police officers doing anything wrong. And so, and that's what the public expects. So with this new decision, if he ends up back on the force, I mean, I hope that the mayor and the police chief both publicly make statements that say he cannot come back to Portland Police. That's what I wanted to hear from the mayor when I first heard this arbitrator's decision.
Well, the mayor did mention here in this particular article that Maxine Bernstein wrote that Mayor Adams said, who serves as police commissioner, said the city would appeal the ruling.
Right. He said the city would appeal the ruling, but that's not strong enough. I think he needs to be really clear that there is no place on Portland Police Force for this officer, for Fresh Hauser. I don't care what the arbitrator says, and so whatever the city has to do to make sure that he never wears a Portland police officer uniform again, that's what they should be working on. Not trying to publicly position themselves to say, well, we're going to follow, we're going to do whatever the legal course is. No, you have to make a decision, and I think it's in the mayor's best interest to get out in front of this and make it really clear that there's no place for him on our police force.
Again, from a historical standpoint, you've cited several other cases of several killings and whatever, and that same process was pretty well followed.
Same process was followed.
Talking to a solution aspect here, because just as a layperson, you have a jury trial, reaching your peers. I mean, that's the normal situation. What do you think would be a solution, if you will, to some of the issues that we're looking at and discussing today?
One solution is that this grand jury process has to be open. It has to be open to public review. We can no longer allow the police to frame the story, present it to people who are prone to believe that if the police say it, I mean, most of the public just believes that if the police say it, it must be so. So the grand jury process has to be opened up. And anytime a Portland police officer is involved in a shooting, we cannot have Multnomah County actually investigating, Multnomah County grand jury or Portland police officers during the investigation. We need an independent investigator for any police-involved shooting so that the public starts to have some certainty that the people who are doing the investigation is not the workmate of the person that they are investigating. And so the public needs to have some certainty that it's a process that is fair and that's open, and that the public can come in and actually sit in the courtroom and watch what's taking place. We don't want to wait and hear what the Oregonian says happened. We want to be able to go to the courtroom and sit in there and see the police present their case, and then see what comes out of the police presentation.
As I was thinking about this thing, and actually I'm glad we're getting this history aspect of it, because I noticed that from a historical standpoint, the Oregonians always kept it in the metro section.
Yes.
It was never on the front page of the Oregonian. I thought that was somewhat interesting that the Oregonian placed this on the front page of the Sunday paper, which is a well-read paper. I would have thought they would have appeared in the second edition also too, but it did appear on the front page. So someone is saying something, and so that it's sort of like a sign to say we need to do something about this issue.
Well, I actually think since the death of Aaron Campbell, I actually think the Oregonian has done a much better job of actually reporting the entire story. I think the media has a propensity to actually use the police press release as if that was news. And now I think that they're actually much more aware of this issue of whether or not police are held accountable in this community. So I think the AMA's coalition has done a good job of actually bringing this issue to the forefront and actually holding the media accountable for how they report. Because what normally happens is the day after a community member is shot, the next day there's an article in the paper with mysterious information about their criminal history or what was alleged criminal history. And I always ponder that. How is it possible that the next day, all of a sudden, you've got, oh yeah, so and so was, was charged with this in their past? Well, it's because the police provides that information to the media, right? And so I find that appalling because they did the same thing with Chassie. Right, the alleged, the crumbs in the bag that was allegedly drugged.
Caucasian,
right? Caucasian, but a guy with mental illness, right? So, and so that's the factor. If you, the police say you didn't follow instructions. Well, if you have mental illness, it's really hard to follow instructions. But if you're black or brown and you're between 12 and 24. We have created a community where you have to prove you're not a gang member versus, probable cause. What is the probable cause that you have to believe I'm involved in gang behavior? And unfortunately, we've allowed the police to decide who's a gang member and who isn't. I mean, how do they know? And because immediately it's like they're a gang member. That happened. They tried to say that about Aaron Campbell. They the next day after he was killed, they tried to put whatever dirt was in his past and bring that out. That's the way it normally happens. The person who is killed is the one that's now in a defensive mode to try to prove that they in fact weren't involved in any behavior that should have caused their death. I mean, with Jared Perez, the fact that they thought his car was too new for the neighborhood that he was driving in. African-American man driving Hispanic man driving in Northeast Portland, and the police say he failed to signal for a turn into a parking lot, but he's dead. I mean, who thinks that that's the penalty for failing to signal at a turn? That can't be acceptable. As that's just collateral damage. That cannot be acceptable.
Look, we've got about another minute or so. We're going to take a break, but again, I want to emphasize the fact that Joanne has given us a historical perspective on this issue, which is very important. And then our second half hour, we're going to give Dr. Bethel the opportunity to talk about the AMA's involvement in this whole issue and their rationale for that involvement aspect of it. I guess we got about another minute or so, but I'll ask you one other question. Is that I'm thinking about in this article, it talked about Officer Darrell Turner, who's the present president of the Portland Police Association,
yes, he is.
Who is an African American.
Yes, he is.
And again, my thought was when he was appointed as president of the association, I thought that was sort of a mood, if you will, by the union, if you will, since we're having so many issues from a blacks or Hispanics aspect of it. This might, quote, get someone to the table that are sensitive, if you will, because he happens to be African American, to talk about the sensitivity and whatever. And so I would ask is that when he was appointed, is this someone that came to the community and talked to the folks who've been involved? For instance, like the Harry Jacksons of the world. I'm thinking about the Harry Jackson and thinking, why wasn't he appointed right off the bat? Because Harry was from the area. Not to say that, but my point is that I thought it was kind of like in good taste, if you will, to have someone of color. But again, is it working?
He was elected by the Portland police officers. So they had an election. There were 3 people that ran. He got the most votes. So he ended up being the president of the police union. It has not mattered the color of the president of the Portland Police Association. Hasn't even mattered who the color of the police chief. it has not fundamentally changed the relationship between the African American community and police in the city of Portland. So nothing's changed by having a black man's face as the president of the Portland Police Association.
Interesting. Well, look, we're going to go on and take a short break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to give Dr. Bethel the opportunity to talk about the AMA and involvement. Joanne, you did an excellent job, and we're going to continue to talk about this piece. Okay?
Wonderful.
Sounds good. We're going to take a short break, folks, and we'll be right back.
You are watching Oregon Voters Digest. This program can be seen again on these channels on these dates and times. Tell a friend.
Okay, folks, welcome back again. Again, as you note, we're talking to something that, an issue that is taboo. You're not supposed to talk about these kinds of issues. I think it's very, very important. And it's not just only our community here in the Portland metropolitan or Oregon area that's having these problems. It's all over the country. And we've done a number of other things. We've hired more people of color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the issue still continues on. And we do know for fact, and again, like Joanne understands about this whole piece again too, against it's a them against us type deal situation, and we tend to protect our own, so to speak. And we have that same sort of culture here within our law enforcement. Even though what's the first thing you do when somebody breaks into your home? You want to call law enforcement.
You want to,
you
right?
want to. You see what I'm saying? And so a lot of the incidents. So we need to talk about these solutions. So that's what we're doing. That's why we're having this show here at the at PCM, Portland Community Medium, because that's what it's all about. It's about community, and you don't see this kind of discussion in our daily papers. In all due respect, even in our minority newspapers. I mean, I would have thought that would have been the headline and the discussion, but in all due respect, there are some things there, and hopefully they will do a more in-depth deal on this issue here. It's very, very important, so all of us should join to solve the problems on both sides of the aisle. Now what we're going to do, we're going to give Dr. Bethel here, who happens to be president of the AMA, the opportunity to talk about this issue and however he wants to rephrase this. Dr. Bethel.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And Joanne, thanks a lot for the history that you gave us to bring us to this point. The Albino Ministerial Alliance has been around for a long time, but beginning back with the Kendra James case, when we began to look at the accountability, the issues, and what was going to happen with that particular case. We also know that out of that case, the recommendations came and they were overturned as well. If you go back and look at the history all the way back to the possum incident, where they threw the possum in front of the businesses, even those two officers were exonerated, you might say, by arbitration. And that's continued to be the history as it comes forward and continues to go. The coalition has surrounded itself around 5 principles, and I want to go over those 5 principles today. But basically, we're looking at police accountability and policy changes or reform. This has nothing to do with the Portland situation, but it seems as always that when something happens, it seems that people believe that if they can pin it on an African American and they take the blame, that it's okay. It reminds me of the Stewart case back in Boston, Massachusetts, where Mr. Stewart left the hospital, drove into the community and said that an African American had shot and killed his wife who was pregnant. It was the farthest thing from the truth, but the police department then at that time just went after African Americans wholesale. Unfortunately, it was Mr. Stewart who killed his own wife, but made up all of that bogus information. He was a Caucasian. Made up all of that information and which had the community on pins. and needles about to explode in terms of the things that the police were doing, trying to find, quote unquote, this African American who would do such an atrocious thing of killing a person. We were concerned about that. Now let me fast forward and jump back into Portland. We're concerned that every person in the city goes home safe every night, every day, and can feel free in walking around in a free society. However, there is a great disparity. There seems to be, and I believe that there is a systematic problem in terms of accountability and justice and policy when it comes to things that are happening with the officers who are involved in the African American community or involved with African Americans, period. We seem to see that every time there is an overturn by the arbitrator. There is absolutely nothing that ever is wrong, but we have to question. If there is nothing wrong, then why are we paying out so much money? Why do we pay out the claims? Just most recently in the claim for the Campbell family. And I'm not against the families being compensated, because I believe when an injustice has been done, we must seek to do what we can do to help to repair that injustice. But it was in the best interest of the city to settle. And they settled. That's good. But we did not get the opportunity now with the arbitrator who's looking at this. And I just wonder today where her heart is, where her mind is. Is it so calloused, so hardened that she does not feel anything about how the community feels? And I'm not just talking about the African American community. I'm talking about the wholesale community of the city of Portland and its surrounding areas that are looking at what's happening in this #1 city, most livable city. I believe that those ratings are far, far, far going down to the bottom. And we're going to become known as, if you really want to die quick, go to Portland, turn a corner, don't signal, and you will find yourself gone on to your reward. Though the coalition has been working, we've been calling on people to help us with this whole idea of reform and accountability. When I look at this arbitrator piece and what the arbitration has done, and we understand that there are times when there are disagreements, you need to have arbitration. But I simply believe that the arbitration process, that it seems that the union depends on to get its way, needs to be revamped. Yes. It needs to be looked at. It can no longer continue to do things and feel and go, because systemically arbitrators turn back in favor of the officer no matter what type of information you have or that you present. When it was first asked when they were going to arbitration about the firing of Frashauer, and incidentally, here's the second time that the police department or the Bureau has rank and file officers. I don't know if there was any executive or top level officers involved in this, but back during the time when they choked one person, they wore T-shirts that says, "Don't choke 'em, smoke 'em." Right. Now, when Frashauer does this, they go and put on T-shirts that say, "I am Frashauer." Well, that tells me that perhaps all of them have the same mindset that Frashauer has. And that mindset is that if I believe and I think that this person is going to do something, then I will end that person's life. And then I feared for my life, or I feared for the safety of others. Now, please do not misunderstand me, public. There are times when people must be held accountable. There are times when criminals must be brought to justice. But when it is such a disparity, as Joanne Hardesty mentioned in our first half, that in other areas they can unarm, take in a suspect, and deliver them to get help, and their lives are still breathing, they're still live to tell their story. But in incidences with African Americans, Hispanics, and mentally ill people, we are finding, I don't mean to say mentally ill, with a mental illness, because I want to be correct and not offend even my brothers and sisters who are dealing with mental issues, that the end is always death. You call a person, "I've got problems with my son or my daughter, I need some help." dealing with some mental challenges, that person ends up dead. They didn't call you to kill their child. They didn't call you to kill their loved one. Go out for a welfare check on Aaron Campbell. And what happens to Aaron Campbell? He comes out with his hands above his head. Well, another officer decides that that's not surrender enough. So I want you to do something different. So he begins to shoot him with beanbags. And of course, they're going to explain, well, the maneuver he wanted him to do was to make sure that we could see his waistband to see if he didn't have any other weapon concealed in there, that then we would not have to do this or do that. And sure, the arbitrator brought in all of these experts, quote unquote, witnesses, who said that he could be shooting even as he's running. This could happen. That could happen. Here's the scenarios. I'd like to ask the arbitrator, how many people did you call out of the community? How many people did you call that were civilians to say, please tell us your response about what do you think about what happened? It always seems to be that it's weighted, even in the grand jury process, towards the officer. So the grand jury process, again, as it's been said, it needs to be changed. We want, and we're calling for, as part of our 5 points in our coalition, is that we want independent investigators and prosecutors, because we believe if we can get somebody independent, we'll have someone different. And then before, Bruce, we get into any other questions, let me tell you that we ask for, and we have received from the Department of Justice, United States Department of Justice, Washington, D.C., an audit of patterns and practices, because we believe there are systemic issues within the Bureau. Regardless of what our policies are stating, the policies are there, but the individuals are doing things different. And when they're being done differently, then you've got a systemic issue. And you can't just rely on what the policy states. Yes, the policy states that you should make and signal your turn 100 feet, I believe I have this correct, before you turn. I observe police officers who never turn on their signals and make turns, who make quick turns in front of people. I've even seen some, and I don't have reason to know because I don't have access to the radio log, but the sirens go on, jump around traffic real quick, sirens go off and they slow down. Yep. Well, maybe the emergency got canceled. I'm not sure. But I observed them doing things that are not right. Have any of them been pulled over for doing that? Accosted? Shot? Stomped on the concrete? Kicked in the ribs? Carried down to the precinct? Told that they need medical help and you won't bring them in here? Then you carry them out like some dead prey that you've just shot, a deer or elk or a bear, and you put them in the back seat of a car, and then when you find that they're not breathing, you lay them out on concrete. Or a person is shot like Keith Notice, and you lay his body out on the concrete for over 6 hours, uncovered, looking, trying to determine what have you done. Still unanswered questions. Was he slapped in the face prior? We can't get an answer to that. Where is the supposedly gun that he used to shoot the officer, allegedly shoot the officer, has not been found. So that gun disappeared. So if I would believe what I watch on television sometimes, somebody tells me I watch too much television, is that going to be a piece that's going to be found on somebody else later that's going to be planted? I don't know. I'm simply asking the question. And so, as the old story goes, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just trying to carry the message. There are some things that need to happen. This arbitration in favor of returning the officer will not make our Bureau or our city safer. I believe that when he goes back, as I understand, to the area in which he was already on patrol, that many people in that neighborhood are going to perhaps have the attitude, if I see him, I am going to get out of the way. But I think that there are some who are going to say, when I see him, I'm going to get him before he gets me. And that should not be the attitude of anyone who walks in the streets, driving the streets of the city of Portland. I ask the union, I ask Darrell Turner, to examine your heart and really, really look at it and say, do you really think you've won a victory? Or have you initiated a war that has put a shorter fuse on a powder keg that was about to explode, that at this point, I'm not sure that anyone will be able to control it if it gets out of hand.
I so agree with that. I mean, my biggest fear is that this summer is going to be a very confrontational summer with law enforcement. Because when you have a community that no longer has faith and trust in the people that are sworn to protect and serve them, then you have a community that it becomes fear-based, right? And they're fearful of everything. And so I'm very, very concerned about that. I didn't want this hour to leave without saying what a ridiculous thing it is for the city of Portland to be trying to build a Portland Police Training Center down by the airport. The city of Portland just recently, the city council by unanimous vote approved $2.5 million to start the process of building this police training center.
Purpose for which? What kind of training?
For Portland police officers. So, and what they want to do is take their ill-prepared training officers that they have now and just transfer all of them to this new facility that will be on Airport Way and have them do a constant, continuous training of Portland police officers. I have to check, and in fact, the police officer who was reprimanded for putting the Nazi signs up in the park is one of the leadership training officers now. So if you have a police force that has the worst possible reputation when it comes to engaging communities of color and the broader community, because I think middle-class white kids found out that Portland police officers are not their friend when the Occupy movement started earlier this year. There has been this huge shift in the perspective of middle-class white kids who, up until the Occupy, just assume the officers are our friends. They're part of the 99%. They're going to be here for us. Once they experience police violence, once they experience police officers just willy-nilly going through the crowd and pushing people and hitting people. One young man is facing trial now. The lone African-American that they picked out of a crowd of Occupy Portlanders is facing a felony charge of assault on a police officer, and he goes on trial tomorrow. Tomorrow morning he goes to court for a trial date. And so he happened to be one of 500 people at a march. He said one of 5 African Americans, one of 10 Latinos out of 500 people. And the police decide that they're going to pass all these other people, come up to him, take the bicycle and hit him with his bicycle, and then arrest him and charge him with assault on the police officer. So I think what we have is a whole new community that because I know, because I was on the Charter Review Commission before that was shut down, and these young people kept coming to the Charter Commission meetings saying the police are out of control. The police are out of control. Now, I hate to say this, but when it was just black and brown kids and we're constantly saying you shouldn't have to prove that you're worthy of walking down your own street in your own neighborhood. You shouldn't have to actually be searched by cops just for being a black kid or a brown kid in Northeast Portland. Now that white kids are suffering that same kind of experience, all of a sudden there's a broader community that's like, wait a minute, that's not the cops we're supposed to have. I sat at the last police union negotiations talk, and this is, by the way, the police union contract.
Okay.
Secret ones.
And this is the one that expires on June of 2013. I sat in what was supposed to be a public process for the police union, and here's what I walked away with. No one represents the public in those negotiations. You would think The city of Portland would be trying to think, well, what's in the best interest of taxpayers? How do we make sure that we're going to be holding police accountable, as well as creating a true community policing force in the community? You look at that book, it's all about, let's give police $700 free so they can get their fingers pricked, so they and we'll call that physical fitness, right? Appalling, $700 per police officer. So we spent a couple of $1 million having police officers get their fingers pricked. We spent another couple of $1 million on overtime costs. Do you know police officers that are on call will be paid to be on call, and then if they actually have to answer a phone, they're paid more money because they actually had to do something while they were on call. I mean, I'm a union person. I grew up in a union household. I believe in unions. But the police union's contract is pretty appalling when you think about what it is they're responsible to do and then what they get in return. To me, it's pretty appalling. And so I don't think anybody represents the public. Nobody goes into those negotiations saying, what's a normal person to think of this, right? Somebody who's outside of, what would a normal person think of this? I was pretty appalled to see the city of Portland negotiators, they give away the shop every time. So if you look at this contract, it's going to expire next year in June. We're going to have a new city council. We're going to have at least 2, maybe 3 new city council members. We will have a new police commissioner. And I'm concerned that they will once again go behind closed doors and make a deal with Portland police officers that does not serve the public well.
Tell me something. Before we got on, we were talking about I was concerned about what is the definition of the arbitrator, if you will.
Right.
And we've got this system area, and all of a sudden they can come in and basically just appeal that situation or whatever. Yeah. What about the arbitration piece aspect of it? Is this you made mention about the fact
actually
it's part
the
of the
arbitration
contract.
is part of the contract. It's Article 22 of the Police Bureau's contract is all about the process of arbitration. And the arbitrators actually there's about 5 arbitrators that they get to choose from, and both sides have to agree on who the arbitrator is. And so. And then the arbitrator's decision is supposedly a final decision, right? So it's like the union says that if there's a grievance that they don't agree on, then they go through an arbitration process.
Well, Joanne, on that same note, okay, if this situation happened and they took the public through all sorts of situations, people got very upset on both sides of the deal and whatever. If in fact this was the arbitration was part of the contract, why didn't they just go on and set up the arbitration from day one?
Well, they can't just set up the arbitration because they have to have something to arbitrate.
There's got to be a process.
There's got to be a process, and there has to be the grievance. So what happened was when they went through all of the procedures to recommend his firing, it was upheld by the chief, Chief Reese. Then it was upheld by the commissioner, who is same as the mayor. Then they put that in. Then the union or the officer says, I don't agree with that. I want to go to arbitration. I'm going to file a grievance.
But then in the mayor, if it takes 2, I understand. What if the mayor said, well, no, we're not going to go through arbitration? What?
Well, the contract
lays
and that's a whole nother issue.
Know how to write.
Yeah,
it's
so if I don't agree, it don't matter.
Well, the mayor does not have a right. Once his decision has been made, then the arbitration process kicks in. If the other side does not agree with the decision that was made.
Just take one or the other.
Right.
Disagree.
So right. So it's like
Doesn't take 2.
No, just take the one. And in each case, they have always disagreed with whatever the discipline is.
That's right. Regardless of what it is.
Regardless. Disagree with the discipline.
That's right.
And let's go to arbitration.
And one of the things I found out by sitting through these very long contract negotiations is even if an officer is disciplined, let's say for some odd reason they end up being, say we're going to put them on leave for 2 weeks, the officer can actually use their vacation pay so that they don't lose anything. I think that's pretty appalling. Right? And actually sitting through the contract negotiations where they were actually negotiating just that scenario, I was like, how is that even possible? And what they say is that, well, the officer has suffered enough, right? So, he may have financial reasons why he just cannot afford 2 weeks of no pay, right? Well, I say if it's punishment, if you're actually punishing someone, they're supposed to suffer the consequences of not having 2 weeks pay. And to say that you can use your vacation pay is the same as saying, we're not really going to discipline you. This is kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod.
Well, we got about 5 minutes, or maybe 4 minutes. Let's talk a little bit about tomorrow, or Monday, right?
Yes.
We're doing something
Which is
Monday. And another thing, too, is that I'd like to make a point to the fact that I'd like to invite Officer Darrell Turner to come here on the show and give him the opportunity, if you will, to articulate his position and the rationale as to why they do what they do.
Right.
And I think that's very important. We need to understand what they're doing, whether it be training in terms of how they do their work, et cetera. Very important. So we want to give them the opportunity. I might add that I've asked King at one point in time and others, and the only one that have actually come to the show and have interviewed was Stan Peters. Remember him?
Oh, yeah.
Stan had his issues.
Right.
But one thing I will say, he came here and he interviewed and he basically laid it out just straight up. That was the kind of guy he was, if you will. But unfortunately, we just happened to be a former Marine, so we
that may have had something to do with
it. We communicated real well. So I would Officer Darrell Turner the opportunity, and I will give him a call. I'm gonna give him a call and see whether or not he can come on. And I think it's important. Why not?
Well, I used to meet with Robert King on a regular basis when he was the police union president, because I felt it was important that we keep those lines of communication open. And so I agree. I think he should come on. I would be surprised.
This is not a bashing situation.
No,
this is
and I would encourage him to come. We've had a couple of conversations, talking with him about some of the union things. Officer Turner. But it's been a long time since we've talked.
Okay.
But I would encourage him to come. Yes. Know that no one is going to bash him. And I would encourage him to come and just speak from his heart.
Yes.
And just share those particular things. But in those couple of minutes,
what about tomorrow?
Tomorrow morning,
what are you going to be doing?
We're asking people to gather with us at 11:30 for a press conference march. Demonstration at 12 noon in front of City Hall on the 4th Avenue side. We're going to be there along with other coalition members, and we're going to be talking about the same thing about the arbitration, our disappointment, our statements about it, and sharing with the challenge. I do want to take this time before the close of this to also thank the chief and particularly the mayor for willing to stand up behind your decision and have put some teeth behind it. And I hope that there is a way. Maybe the arbitration is binding because you agree that when you go to arbitration, whatever the arbitrator says is that. But this should spur and spark that we need to change arbitrators, who we bring in. And also, come see us tomorrow. We look for you at noon down at City Hall. Okay. Thank you.
That's a very
fabulous.
Important piece.
And before we leave, I want to. When you look
the
at
new Jim Crow. Now, what is it?
Michelle Alexander wrote this book, The New Jim Crow, that actually talks about our reliance on mass incarceration. And when you read this book, you realize that it's not by accident that we have so many black and brown youth in our criminal justice system. There's a book club. I encourage people to read this book. They'll understand better our criminal justice system.
Folks, thank you very much. And we will be back to talk about this issue. Again, thank you again. Have a good evening. As George Page always said, back to what you believe in.
All right.
Have a good one.
Like that.
And enjoy your Easter. Make sure you recognize that. We can talk the mics off. I thought that was good.
Okay.
What do you think?